It's time to name names, to talk about how they're going to pull off the destruction of the administrative state and what the seeds of our rebellion on the left look and sound like. So today, we're going to identify the most dangerous man in America that no one's talking about, the tool that he's going to use to dismantle the government agencies, and what we can learn from three young Republicans who helped the GOP rise from the ashes of the Obama years. UNFTR. There are show horses, like Trump's clown car cabinet appointments, continue to grab all of the headlines. These are show horses. Most of them will make it and some of them won't, but it doesn't really matter. That's because the real stuff will be done by the workhorses. See, I think the workhorses should be our focus moving forward. Now, that's not to say that this show horse cabinet isn't dangerous. There are some real beauties in there. Just understand that most of them aren't there to do the actual job. That's the mistake that Trump made in the first term. While claiming that he was draining the swamp, he actually proposed a mix of ultra-conservative GOP legislators, major donors, career bureaucrats, and private industry executives. It was a really unwieldy crew in an undisciplined White House with no discernible strategy to move the country in any particular direction. Everything was literally by the seat of the pants. And the Trump White House ran on pure chaos, much in the tradition of Andrew Jackson, seemingly Trump's only political hero. With two notable exceptions, in my estimation, Russell Vought and John Ratcliffe, the show horse appointments have little background in the agencies they're being tapped to lead. And that's the point. They're just distractions. In my mind, the trajectory of this next administration will be really easy to follow. What's less clear right now is how the left rebuilds and gathers momentum during this term. Even a midterm rebuke of Trump's policies will be too little too late to stop the bleeding, as they really do have all the pieces lined up to dismantle key agencies and services. They have an obsequious majority in both houses of Congress, and they've pretty much sewn up the federal judiciary. And not only do they have multiple plans in waiting, they have a prescription to bring them all to fruition, and it just might work. So it's clear that the left needs to build a productive movement. But as the recent election illustrated, the left has been neutered and silenced by a liberal establishment obsessed with chasing a manufactured version of the right wing in this country. The Harris campaign was simply the grossest misreading of the circumstances to date. So to be fair to the Democratic establishment, something I am loath to do, Trump's misdeeds are rather unbelievable. I mean, so egregious are his behavior and record that I completely understand the temptation to run a campaign in opposition to Trump the individual. I mean, there is no historical corollary in the United States to Donald Trump, a man so preposterously corrupt and disgusting, it defies reason that a majority of the nation, even a slim one, would ask him back for a second turn at the wheel. But Trump is the biggest show horse on the stage. He's the easy target. A man filled with animus, driven by power and directed toward revenge, a felon, a scoundrel, a racist, and a pig. But as we've said many times before, politics is a reflection of sentiment, not aspiration. Aspiration is just packaging, like hope and change. The DNC believed that Obama's hope and change narrative was what delivered his first-term mandate, hence the theme of joy this time around. It wasn't. It was fear and devastation wrought by the financial crisis that drove the electorate to throw out the GOP. And it's in the GOP's response to this drubbing that we can find a solution. So let's go back to that moment in time to see what we can glean from their resistance strategy before talking about how the next 2 years will be cataclysmic for the American people. So you might recall that it was a trio of GOP House representatives that referred to themselves as the, quote, young guns who put the GOP back on track and tapped into the white working class rage exemplified by the burgeoning Tea Party movement. Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, and Kevin McCarthy. These guys modeled their approach in the fashion of Newt Gingrich when Gingrich effectively ran the policy agenda of the Clinton administration. So if this period is a little fuzzy for you, check out the series that we did on the Clinton years to understand how this came to be. Long story short, Bill Clinton ran to the right of the GOP in terms of a domestic economic agenda and then spent 8 years moving further and further right to steal Gingrich's thunder, playing directly into Newt's hands and delivering on his promise of a contract with America. The result was an administration that should now be considered the pinnacle of neoliberal free market experimenting that led to widening inequality, mass incarceration of Black Americans, destruction of the welfare state, and criminalization of immigrants. Fast forward to the early days of the Obama administration, and several GOP leaders were lamenting the Bush years, with many believing the GOP might never again gain control of the White House. That was a real sentiment at the time. The young guns, however, weren't having it. They set about to divide and conquer, so McCarthy would be the inside man due to his close relationship with House Minority Leader John Boehner, who was reared at the knee of Gingrich. Now, Paul Ryan would be the face of the group with his earnest blue eyes and projection of capability and empathy. But it was Cantor who had the plan. So in the first meeting of the GOP House caucus after Obama's landslide victory, Cantor dismissed the party hacks and the policy wonks, and in their place, he invited pollsters to attend. And his mandate to them was clear: find out what people are mad about. And the answer was just as clear. Duh, it's the economy. The masses had lost fortunes, and a generation of workers were destined to make less than their parents did. That was the first in America. So he didn't ask who they were mad at, just what they were mad about, and then they got to work. He chastened the dejected House members and told them to, quote, get out of the fetal position, and from that day forward, they would embody the opposition. Every proposal would be met with defiance, and they would indignantly take to the airwaves on Fox to denigrate the incoming president. Every proposal would be treated as an affront to the masses and a giveaway to the coastal elites. Now, over in the Senate, they had a willing partner in Mitch McConnell who had his own scores to settle with Harry Reid, who had effectively taught McConnell how to leverage the filibuster to his advantage in the minority. As you may recall, this is when McConnell uttered the now infamous phrase that his sole mission was to make Obama a one-term president. However, the fallout from the financial crisis, Bush's mishandling of the economy, the unpopular wars abroad were all still too tangibly Bush's fault to deny Obama a second term. But they did succeed in other ways. First off, they have the popular vote lead in the subsequent election with Mitt Romney. But more importantly, they scuttled most of Obama's domestic agenda outside of the Affordable Care Act, and in doing so, helped slow down the economic recovery. Not only did the painfully slow recovery pave the way for a Donald Trump victory in 2016, with nearly everyone in the political class, myself included, misreading the tea leaves, but they succeeded in painting Obama's signature domestic achievement as a complete and utter failure, so much so that nearly 15 years later, Republican voters still think that Obamacare is something other than the Affordable Care Act. But the lesson here isn't that the Democratic Party needs to become the party of no, because we're going to need more than a wall of legislative and punditry opposition to Trump's populism. The lesson here is that the young guns tapped into something more visceral: white working class rage. In coded and sometimes not so coded language, they were able to exploit Obama's Ivy League education and his inner city upbringing to portray him as an elitist. Even more offensive to the GOP base is that he was a black elitist, a product of affirmative action. That tan suit, fan of arugula salad, vacations on Martha's Vineyard, the black tie dinners, the Kennedy Center honors. While Democrats were heaping praise on Obama for having a common touch, the working class increasingly saw him as out of touch. So, if we're to mount an offensive, it has to be targeted, because they're going to throw the kitchen sink at us in the next couple of years, and it will be the stuff of nightmares, like mass deportations and imprisonments, targeting journalists and dissidents, stripping away healthcare coverage provisions, defunding core services that we've come to rely on. And they're going to taunt us each step of the way, draw us into multiple fights to try and disorient us. So in response, everything that we do has to be steeped in populist economic rage to paint them as out-of-touch monsters. Every single thing they unleash on us has to be reframed as an economic issue. Forget your moral and ethical outrage. Get out of the fetal position, like Eric Cantor told the House GOP. Get mad, but stay focused. If you include Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's made-up cabinet positions in the mix, the combined net worth of Trump's proposed cabinet is $350 billion. So let's find some names for it. Call it the 350 Club. Call it the Boy Luck Club. Whatever. We have to find something to make it stick, so suggestions are welcome. Start referring to RFK as Mad Cow Kennedy to remind people that he's probably going to fuck up our food supply. Don't call them deplorables. Call them deductibles, because your insurance premiums and deductibles are probably about to skyrocket. Everything this administration intends to do is to further separate the masses from their wealth. They'll take away your health care, but they'll tell you that they're giving you options, choice, freedom. That they're taking us back to a Ron Paul simpler vision of healthcare when folks looked out for one another with country doctors and roadside abortions and all that jazz. When it's too costly to deport millions, they'll lock up the rest of the immigrants in the private prisons that will be bursting at the seams along with their profit margins. Because American jobs, they're for real Americans who came here the right way, whatever the fuck that means. And when there's no one at the drive-thru window to take your order, no one to watch your kids in daycare you can barely afford as it is, and no nurses to take care of your Meemaw and Pop-Pop, they'll do what they always do. Blame you for being too lazy to do the menial jobs that never paid enough in the first place. When your kids graduate high school with a third-grade education and zero prospects in a recklessly rolled-out AI-driven job market, at least they'll be able to recite the 10 Commandments and tell you that dinosaurs weren't real. As the jobless rate rises and income taxes decline, so too will property and sales taxes, because you see, that's the tricky thing about state and local governments. They're required to balance their budgets. So they use a mixture of taxes and fees to raise revenues. And if you're one of the 41 states that collects income tax, well, when that declines due to high unemployment, it's a double whammy. They have to raise revenue in other places to pay their bills, which will also increase because they share the unemployment insurance burden. And heck, with climate disasters on the rise and the impending shutdown of FEMA and all federal disaster funding, it will fall on those very same states to shell out billions of dollars to repair our busted infrastructure and pay out premiums to state-guaranteed insurance funds, because the private insurance companies will have pulled up stakes long ago. But at least we'll be energy independent. And maybe old Mad Cow Kennedy can whip up a new food pyramid to show us how to make soup with fracked gas and crude oil. Hopefully it's alphabet soup, because that's the closest thing your kids are going to get to a spelling lesson once the Department of Education is defunded. You see, that's the hell of this whole thing. Democrats, bless their hearts, know a bit more about balance and how to keep the carrot seemingly within reach of the working class. Republicans aren't even pretending. They're going to take it all. The difference between the beta version of Trump and this new release is preparedness. And the best thing I can tell you is that there will be someone to blame. Russell Vought, who will heretofore be referred to as Russputin. Russputin is the man in the czar's ear. His grimy fingerprints are all over Project 2025. And here's the thing. The public document, that 900-page bullshit manifesto, is merely the opening salvo, designed to focus our attention on the broader vision. Because behind the scenes, Russputin's minions have been working diligently on individual policy implementation plans and pieces of legislation so they can be instituted day one of Trump's second term. And how do I know all of this? Because they wrote it all down and then admitted to it on camera. When an undercover European media outlet spoke to Russputin and a bunch of his minions, they just copped to it. They bragged about it. I'll leave a link to that investigation in the notes. But here's the important thing about this guy and his position in the administration. Vought is no dummy. He's done this exact job before. He was the OMB director at the very end of Trump's first term, so he's pretty familiar with the office and its powers. The OMB is the nucleus of the nation's economic cell. Now, it's not as sexy as the Federal Reserve or the Treasury. God, those are two sexy agencies. But it is the real money and budget manager of the country that works at the behest of the chief executive and on behalf of Congress. The OMB has the authority to move money around within reason, to limit spending in certain areas, and to increase it in others, so long as these moves don't undermine the intention of the funds and the efficacy of the spending. However, and this is a huge however, Russputin spent most of his time the past couple of years creating a plan to circumvent Congress in the budget process in order to consolidate budget authority within the executive branch so that the OMB can direct all of the funds. So there are shades of Nixon to this whole affair in so many ways. First, procedurally. You see, for the past few years since leaving the first Trump administration, Russputin has been touting the repeal of a Nixon-era piece of legislation called impoundment. Prior to Nixon, there were certain norms that the executive branch followed when it came to appropriations. Essentially, once Congress approved a budget, the necessary funds were provisioned to carry it out. But Nixon went off the rails and held back funding for key budget items that he personally despised under the power of something called impoundment. As ProPublica writes, quote, President Richard Nixon took impoundment to a new extreme, wielding the concept to gut billions of dollars from programs he simply opposed, such as highway improvements, water treatment, drug rehabilitation, and disaster relief for farmers. He faced overwhelming pushback from both Congress and in the courts, end quote. So to ensure that this never happened again, in 1974, Congress passed the Budget and Impoundment Control Act. When Russputin left the Trump administration, he founded the Center for Renewing America, a conservative Christian think tank that takes aim at things like critical race theory and immigration, and supports economic policies such as a balanced budget amendment. God, I hate these people. Anyway, the real central thesis of Rasputin's think tank is that the Impoundment Control Act is unconstitutional, despite multiple attempts to dismantle it that failed in federal court already. So he believes that Trump has the legitimate authority to override the act and divert funding away from the Biden budget in 2025, as well as the ability to simply shutter agencies without seeking congressional approval. It's a pretty bold stance given the legislative and judicial history of upholding the act over the years. But Russputin is banking on one crucial difference between now and all of the other attempts to repeal this act: the complete control of Congress and the higher courts. In other words, good luck in getting an injunction on any of these actions in time to save the country. This is their government now. Russputin and people like Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society, the one who packed the courts with conservative ideologues, they're the ones in charge. They're the workhorses. Look no further. Do not pass go. Do not collect your unemployment check. They've seized every property on the board. They've built hotels, and they will send you the fuck to jail if you can't pay your debt. The crazy thing about all of it, though, is that Project 2025 is both the most assiduously planned document and the most short-sighted. Because it's going to work. They're going to tear it all down, and there's very little we can do about it in the short term. The only question is what form our resistance will take when everybody realizes finally what they've done. See, like Nixon, they're going to run this economy so fucking hot in a short period of time through a combination of tax cuts and tariffs, it will appear to be working until it doesn't. Like Kissinger and Nixon, Russputin and Ratcliffe will be running a shadow military operation to throw the Middle East into more chaos, which will create massive volatility in the energy markets. That's why Project 2025 specifically calls for the CIA and the executive branch to run autonomously without operational oversight from Congress. And like Nixon, this will inevitably throw the global economy into utter chaos, resulting in more inflation and high unemployment. In other words, stagflation. You know, we treat these conditions like it's ancient history, but it's only 50 years ago, long enough to forget how it felt, but recent enough that we should fucking know better. There's a lot more to come on Russputin, Leonard Leo, and even Ratcliffe. But in the meantime, here are some key takeaways. Talk about Russell Vote. Make his name known. Refer to him as Russputin, maybe. Perhaps his tenure will end as ingloriously as the original Rasputin. Don't forget, mere months after his expulsion and then death, the Russian Revolution took hold. In that spirit, remember that if the founders of the neoliberal movement modeled their revolution on Lenin's theory of a vanguard, so can we. So ignore the show horses, reframe everything that they throw at us into an economic inequality issue. Talk about the elitism of the 350 Club. Come up with a better name with it too, please. Maybe the Boy Luck Club or something silly that sticks. Don't call people deplorables, call them deductibles. Call RFK Mad Cow Kennedy, whatever you have to do. Make sure that everybody realizes that these are the assholes that are doing this to you, and it's not some hangover from the Biden administration. We have a very small role to play in all of this, but it's an important one. Our job is to create a shared language that reframes the narrative. It's time for pitchforks, and to remember that we are the 99%. Here endeth the lesson. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you told about 1,000 of your friends to do the same thing. Please visit UNFTR.com while you're at it. That's our website, and you can find a link to progressive resources that we've carefully curated and cultivated over the years there. You can find our archival materials, so essays, podcasts, videos that we've done in the past, and you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter. So this is a roundup of top news stories with some original thoughts, original essays, graphs and charts, a whole mishmash of really good progressive resources that we jam-pack into one amazing free, did I mention free? Newsletter. So go to UNFTR.com, sign up today, and continue to support the channel. Every little bit helps. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next video.